The townhouse in Kensington stood tall and silent, a monument to wealth that looked impressive from the outside, but felt cold once you stepped inside. Clara Jennings tried to convince herself it was only because she had not yet made it a home. The marble floors, the heavy curtains, the grand staircase, all of it belonged to Adrian Blackwell, her new husband, and she wanted desperately to believe that soon it would feel like theirs. Adrian was everything she thought she wanted in a man: sophisticated, successful, admired by his peers. When they met at a charity gala 6 months earlier, he swept her into a world of elegance and charm she had only glimpsed from a distance. He knew how to command a room, how to make her laugh with perfectly timed wit, and how to make her feel chosen, almost treasured. Clara had fallen hard and quickly. Their wedding, rushed though it was, had been the talk of their circle. To her friends, she looked like the luckiest woman alive. But already, within weeks of marriage, Clara felt the cracks forming. It began with small things that seemed too petty to mention aloud. Adrian insisted on handling all the finances, telling her she shouldn't burden herself with such matters. When she offered to transfer part of her inheritance to their joint account, he brushed her off with a smile, then quietly locked her out of their banking information. "Let me take care of you," he said smoothly. "It's what a husband does." His tone was warm, but the way he said it left no room for discussion. The isolation followed soon after. Clara loved visiting her old friends, a small group of writers and teachers she had known since university, but Adrian always had a reason to dissuade her. "You look tired, darling," he would say, taking her coat from her hand. "Why not rest at home tonight? They don't understand the world we live in now." Sometimes he suggested her friends were jealous, whispering doubts that slowly took root in her mind. Invitations stopped arriving as she declined one after another, until silence settled in their place. Clara told herself she had a new life now, but sometimes in the empty rooms of the townhouse, she missed the sound of ordinary conversation. Adrian, meanwhile, was always watching. His charm never slipped in public. He was attentive, courteous, the perfect husband in the eyes of others. Yet behind closed doors, his eyes carried a sharpness that unsettled Clara. If she spent too long on the phone, he asked who it was with a casual smile that didn't reach his eyes. If she came down late for dinner, he teased her about laziness in a voice that almost sounded affectionate, but the words stung. She laughed it off at first, but the laughter never reached her chest. One evening, as Clara set the table for dinner, Adrian walked in late from a meeting. He placed a hand on her shoulder, kissed her cheek, and whispered, "You didn't need to open that wine. It's too expensive for a simple night in." His voice was low, not angry, but firm enough to make her feel foolish. She apologized quickly, though she wasn't sure why. That night, she lay awake in their king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering when she had started apologizing for ordinary things. Clara wanted to believe she was imagining it, that every relationship had adjustments, that Adrian only wanted the best for them both. And yet, as she drifted between sleep and wakefulness, she could not shake the image of his smile earlier that evening. Polished, perfect, and utterly unyielding. It was a mask, she realized suddenly, a mask that had dazzled her and everyone else. And now, little by little, the mask was beginning to crack. The townhouse grew quieter as the weeks passed, but the silence was not comforting. It pressed down on Clara like a weight she could not lift. At first, she tried to fill the emptiness with reading and small hobbies, but Adrian always found a way to dismiss them. "Do you really need to waste time on that?" he would say, glancing at the books stacked by her chair. "You could spend your time improving yourself, taking courses that might actually be useful." His voice was calm, reasonable, almost loving, but there was no room to argue. Soon, Clara stopped reading. It became harder to tell what was her choice and what was his suggestion. Adrian spoke with such certainty that she began to feel uncertain about everything. If she forgot to lock a window, he would laugh and shake his head, saying, "Clara, you're so careless. What if someone broke in? You really must pay attention. If she cooked dinner a little too long, he sighed, not angrily, but with the kind of disappointment that cut deeper than any shouted word. I suppose practice makes perfect, he murmured, pushing food around his plate. Each correction sounded gentle, but each left a scar. Her world shrank. Phone calls to her parents grew shorter. Adrian often picked up first, telling them Clara was resting or feeling unwell. When she finally managed to speak to them, he stood close by, listening. She found herself parroting his words without realizing it. Yes, I've been tired lately. Maybe I am a little stressed. Adrian's right, I should take better care of myself. On the other end of the line, her mother's voice sounded hesitant, unsure, as if she believed Clara, but didn't know what to say. By the end of the call, Clara herself was unsure whether she was telling the truth. It wasn't just her parents. Slowly, Adrian convinced everyone around her that she was fragile, unsteady, unreliable. He told her friends she was suffering from anxiety, that she needed rest. When they asked why she never joined dinners or parties anymore, he smiled and said she was better off avoiding stress. At first, Clara was angry, but then she heard her father mention it in a soft voice. Adrian says you're not well, Clara. We're worried. The words made her chest tighten. Was she truly not well? Was she imagining all of this? Nights became the hardest. She lay in bed while Adrian scrolled through his phone beside her, calm and collected, while her own mind raced with questions she could not answer. Every time she thought she had a clear memory of what he had said or done, Adrian would twist it the next morning. I never said that, he insisted smoothly. You must be confusing things again. Honestly, Clara, I think you need rest. You're exhausting yourself. His certainty was frightening, and after enough repetition, she began to believe him. She doubted her memory, doubted her instincts, doubted herself. But one afternoon, when Adrian left in a rush for a business meeting, Clara wandered into his study. He had always told her not to bother with paperwork. Too complicated for you, darling. Yet something compelled her to look. She opened a drawer, expecting nothing more than dull business reports. Instead, she found a folder with her name on it. Her hands trembled as she pulled out the papers. They were bank statements, long lists of transactions that made her throat tighten. Numbers stared back at her. Withdrawals, transfers, accounts she didn't recognize. Clara read carefully, her heart sinking with each line. It wasn't just Adrian handling their finances, it was Adrian draining them. Her inheritance, the money her late grandmother had left her, the savings that had always made her feel safe, all of it was slipping away into accounts in his name. She dropped the papers back into the drawer, her chest heaving. But the truth could not be hidden again. Adrian wasn't just controlling her life. He was dismantling it piece by piece until nothing of her own remained. That night, when Adrian came home and smiled at her as if nothing were wrong, Clara forced a smile back. Her voice was steady, her movements calm, but inside something had shifted. For the first time, she was no longer confused. She was certain. The mask was gone, the lies were clear, and she finally saw the chains he had locked around her. They were not made of iron, but of silence, manipulation, and fear. And now she knew she had to find a way to break them. The move came suddenly, as all of Adrian's decisions seemed to. One evening, over dinner, he announced that they would be leaving London. Too noisy, too many distractions, he said with a smile that didn't invite argument. You need peace, Clara, and I need a proper place to focus on my work. Scotland will do us both good. Within a week, their belongings were packed, the townhouse abandoned, and Clara found herself staring out of the window of a car as the city faded into the distance, replaced by rolling hills and endless stretches of gray sky. The estate in Scotland was grand, almost intimidating in its scale. The mansion stood on a windswept cliff, surrounded by acres of land that seemed to stretch forever. To an outsider, it might have looked like a dream. Stone walls covered in ivy, wide halls, and fireplaces in every room. But to Clara, The house felt alive in a way that unsettled her. Its silence was heavier than the townhouse had ever been, broken only by the howl of the wind rattling the windows at night. She told herself it was beautiful, that she should be grateful. Yet every step she took echoed back at her, as if reminding her she was alone. Isolation became complete here. In London, at least she could hear the noise of traffic, the laughter of strangers walking past. In Scotland, there was nothing. Adrian often left for long stretches, claiming to be managing business in the nearby city. The staff he had promised to hire never materialized, leaving Clara to wander empty halls and prepare meals in a kitchen too large for one person. Her phone signal was unreliable, internet nearly non-existent. When she tried to call her parents, the line always seemed to cut out. Adrian assured her it was simply the countryside, that she would adjust in time. But Clara's unease grew each day. She began to notice how his anger surfaced more openly now that no one else was watching. He criticized her for the smallest details: the way she folded sheets, the way she poured his tea, the way she walked too heavily on the stairs. He never shouted, but his voice carried a quiet, sharp edge that pierced deeper than any yell could. "Clumsy again," he would mutter, shaking his head. "I don't know how you ever managed before me." At night, she lay awake in the dark, repeating his words in her mind until she almost believed them. One night, when Adrian was away, Clara took a bold step. She retrieved a notebook she had hidden under her pillow and began writing everything she could remember. Every insult, every manipulation, every unexplained transaction. Her hand trembled as she wrote, but once the words began to fill the page, a strange sense of relief washed over her. It was proof, something outside her head that could not be twisted or denied. She hid the notebook beneath a loose floorboard in the guest room, praying Adrian would never find it. Later, she managed to steal an old voice recorder from his office and began whispering her thoughts into it at night, her voice barely audible but real, solid. For weeks, Clara held on to these small acts of defiance. They were her lifeline, her only way to remind herself she wasn't losing her mind. But then, one rainy afternoon, something arrived that shifted the balance once more. The sound of the letter slot clattering echoed through the empty hall. Mail was rare here. Adrian usually collected it first, but this time he was gone. Clara picked up the envelope from the floor, noticing immediately that it bore no return address. Her heart pounded as she opened it. The letter was written in hurried handwriting, the ink smudged as if written in a rush. The first words made her freeze. "If you are reading this, then he has already lied to you. My name is Elena Marlowe, and I am Adrian Blackwell's wife." Clara's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the page. She read on, each sentence stabbing at her chest. Elena described years of manipulation, cruelty, and vanishing money. She warned Clara not to trust him, not to believe his mask, not to think she was alone. "He destroys everyone he touches," the letter ended. "If you are smart, you will leave before he burns you too." Clara sank into a chair, staring at the words until they blurred. A part of her wanted to believe this was some cruel prank, a mistake. But deep down, she knew. She had seen enough of Adrian's mask slipping to recognize the truth when it stared her in the face. Someone else had lived this nightmare before her, and had survived just long enough to leave a warning. When Adrian returned that evening, she tucked the letter beneath the mattress in the guest room, next to her secret journal and recorder. She greeted him with a smile that felt carved from stone, her voice steady though her chest throbbed with fear. For the first time, Clara wasn't only afraid for herself. She was afraid of what he had done before, and what he might still do. The letter haunted Clara for days. She read it again and again in the quiet hours, memorizing every shaky line of Elena Marlowe's handwriting. At first, she told herself it might have been written years ago, some remnant of Adrian's past that no longer mattered. But the details felt too fresh, too raw. The pain in Elena's words matched the bruises on Clara's heart. Eventually, Clara's fear gave way to determination. If Alina was real, she had to find her. The opportunity came one afternoon when Adrian left for a supposed meeting in the nearby city. Clara waited until his car disappeared down the winding drive, then pulled the letter from its hiding place. At the bottom corner, nearly smudged into invisibility, was an address. It was all she had. With trembling hands, she called for a taxi, something Adrian had forbidden her to do without his approval, and gave the driver the location. The address led her to a small village 2 hours away, tucked into the misty hills. Clara's stomach twisted as she stepped out of the car, clutching the letter. The cottage she approached was modest, with peeling paint and an overgrown garden. She knocked softly. The door opened, and there she was, Alina Marlowe. She looked older than Clara expected, her face lined with exhaustion, but her eyes burned with the same mixture of fear and anger Clara saw in her own mirror. For a long moment, the two women only stared at each other, recognition passing between them without words. Then Alina whispered, "So he's found someone new." Inside, over lukewarm tea, Alina told her story. She had married Adrian 3 years earlier, swept away by the same charm that had captured Clara. The early days had been intoxicating. The gifts, the promises, the endless attention. But soon the cruelty surfaced. Small criticisms that grew sharper, lies that grew bolder, financial tricks that bled her accounts dry. She spoke of nights locked out of her own home, days when Adrian would vanish without explanation, weeks of questioning her own sanity. Clara felt every word like a knife because it was her life too, replayed in someone else's voice. "He told me I was unstable," Alina said, her hands trembling around her cup, "that I was imagining things. I even believed him for a while, until I saw the money disappear." She pulled open a drawer and showed Clara a stack of bank documents, eerily similar to the ones Clara had found. "He doesn't just destroy love, he destroys lives." For the first time since her marriage began, Clara felt less alone. Here was proof, not on paper, not just in her head, but sitting across from her in flesh and blood. Someone else had endured the same nightmare. They sat for hours, trading stories, their voices rising and breaking as the weight of Adrian's cruelty unfolded between them. Before Clara left, they agreed to meet again in secret to find a way forward. But when Clara returned to the cottage 2 days later, something was wrong. The front door was ajar, the garden trampled. Inside, the rooms were empty, the teacups washed, the documents gone. There was no sign of Alina, no suitcase, no note, nothing. Panic surged through Clara's chest as she called her name, searched every room, but silence pressed back at her. Alina had vanished. That night, Adrian came home earlier than expected. He was in an unusually good mood, humming as he loosened his tie. Clara, her heart pounding, asked carefully if he had seen or heard of Alina Marlowe. For a fraction of a second, his smile faltered, and his eyes flickered with something sharp and dangerous. Then he laughed lightly, shaking his head. "Elena?" he said smoothly. "Darling, you must be mistaken. There is no Elena. You've been under so much stress, dreams, confusion. You really should stop filling your head with nonsense." Clara froze, her skin crawling. The certainty in his voice was terrifying, as though Alina had never existed, as though the hours they had spent together were nothing but her imagination. She wanted to scream, to throw the letter in his face, but when she rushed upstairs to retrieve it from its hiding place, the letter was gone. The floorboard was empty. Adrian's voice echoed up the stairs, calm and commanding. "Clara, come down. We need to talk about your health." She gripped the banister, her body trembling. He had taken the letter. He knew. And now, if anyone ever asked, Alina Marlowe was nothing but a ghost. The days after Elena's disappearance bled into one another, heavy with silence and dread. Clara walked through the mansion like a ghost, never sure if what she had lived with Alina was real or another trick of Adrian's gaslighting. He acted as though nothing had happened, his charm undisturbed, but there was a sharpness in his eyes now, a warning, a reminder that he knew more than he ever let slip. Clara wanted to scream, to run, yet she had nowhere to go. The estate was a prison with no walls. only miles of wilderness that made escape impossible. It was during one of his late-night returns that Adrian's cruelty took a new form. Clara had been waiting in the sitting room, her hands folded tightly in her lap, when he entered smelling of whiskey and smoke. He looked at her as if she were a misbehaving child rather than his wife. "You need to learn discipline, Clara," he said quietly, the words soft but laced with menace. She tried to protest, but he silenced her with a raised hand. Then, almost casually, he lifted the cigar between his fingers and pressed the glowing tip against her arm. The pain was instant and searing. Clara cried out, but Adrian only held her tighter, whispering, "This will teach you not to question me again." When he finally pulled the cigar away, her skin was blistered and raw, the smell of burned flesh hanging in the air. He kissed her forehead gently, as though he had done something kind. "Now you'll remember," he murmured before leaving her sobbing on the floor. From that night on, Clara knew she was no longer just trapped. She was in danger of being destroyed. Her journals and recordings became more desperate, her handwriting jagged, her voice shaking as she whispered into the recorder. She no longer wrote just to remember. She wrote to survive, to leave behind proof in case she didn't. The mansion grew darker each day, its cold halls filled with the echo of Adrian's footsteps and her own fear. But amid her terror, Clara stumbled on something that rekindled her determination. One afternoon, while Adrian was away, she searched his study. She had done it before, but this time she dug deeper, opening every drawer, every hidden compartment. In the bottom of one, beneath a layer of business documents, she found a small velvet box. Her breath caught as she lifted it. Inside lay a necklace, delicate silver with a cracked pendant. Clara recognized it instantly. She had seen it around Elena's neck when they shared tea in that small cottage. Her stomach turned as she lifted it closer to the light. The chain was stained, faint but unmistakable. Dried blood clung to the edges of the pendant. Clara dropped it back into the box, her heart hammering in her chest. Adrian had claimed Elena never existed, had tried to erase every trace of her, but here was proof. Not only had she existed, but something violent had happened to her. That night, Clara sat in the darkness of her room, the necklace hidden beneath her pillow. Every sound in the house made her flinch. Every creak of the floorboards convinced her Adrian was watching. She traced the cool metal of the pendant with her fingers and whispered Elena's name like a prayer. For the first time, she understood fully. If she did nothing, she would meet the same fate. When Adrian finally came upstairs, smiling as if the world belonged to him, Clara forced herself to meet his gaze. She hid her terror behind a quiet nod, but inside, her fear had transformed into something sharper. The cage was burning, but fire could destroy from both sides. And now, Clara knew she had to find a way to turn the flames back on him. Clara knew the necklace was more than a keepsake. It was evidence. But evidence meant nothing if she kept it hidden forever. Her fear of Adrian was suffocating, yet a new thought pushed against it. If Elena had reached out to her, maybe Clara could reach out to someone too. She began to look for an ally, someone who could believe her before Adrian erased her as he had erased Elena. It took days of careful planning. Adrian often checked her phone, her emails, even the books she read. But one afternoon, while he was away at another so-called business meeting, Clara slipped into the small village library where she knew there was a public phone. Her hands trembled as she dialed the number for the police, whispering her name and asking for a private conversation. She was connected to Detective Inspector Rowan Hale. Rowan's voice was calm, steady, the kind that carried authority without harshness. Clara poured out fragments of her story, about the letter, about Elena, about the necklace with its bloodstain. She expected doubt, but Rowan was quiet for a long moment before he said, "You're not the first woman to speak Adrian Blackwell's name in fear." Clara's breath caught. Rowan went on, explaining that 2 of Adrian's previous fiancés had vanished years earlier. Both were women of means. Both had signed over significant assets shortly before they disappeared. and neither case had ever been solved. There were suspicions, Rowan said gravely, but no proof, until now. Clara felt the room spin. Her husband wasn't only abusive. He was dangerous on a level she hadn't fully allowed herself to imagine. The thought of Elena's necklace burned in her mind. Adrian was not just a cruel man hiding behind charm. He was a predator who destroyed anyone who dared to love him. And now, Clara understood with chilling clarity. She was next on that list. They arranged a plan in whispers. Rowan would come to the estate when it was safe, gather the evidence Clara had hidden, and begin building a case. Clara agreed, her voice barely audible but determined. For the first time in months, she felt a thread of hope. She wasn't completely alone. But hope was fragile, and Adrian's instinct for control was sharper than she imagined. That evening, as she sat in the parlor pretending to read, Adrian entered without a sound. His smile was thin, his eyes darker than usual. He walked toward her slowly, his presence filling the room. "You've been busy today, haven't you?" he murmured, his voice silky but edged with menace. Clara froze, her book slipping slightly in her hands. "You think I don't notice when my wife sneaks around? When she whispers into phones that don't belong to her?" Her blood ran cold. He knew. Somehow, he always knew. He crouched beside her chair, close enough for her to smell the smoke on his breath, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "If you ever speak to them again," he whispered, his smile unbroken, "I will kill you. And no one will ever find you, just like the others." Clara sat frozen long after he left the room, and the echo of his threat hanging heavier than the silence of the mansion. The fire on her arm throbbed as though reminding her that he had already proven what he was capable of. She clutched the hidden recorder under her pillow later that night, whispering her terror into it with tears running down her face. But beneath her fear, another truth grew stronger. Adrian was right about one thing. She was busy, and now she would be busier. Because if she stopped, if she faltered, she knew she would not live to see another dawn. It happened on a gray morning when the mist clung low to the ground. Clara stood at the edge of the driveway, her body shaking as police cars pulled up the long path toward the mansion. Detective Rowan Hale stepped out first, his presence steady, his eyes meeting hers with silent reassurance. Within minutes, officers swarmed the house, and Adrian Blackwell, perfect suit, calm smile, was led away in handcuffs. He did not fight. Instead, he looked at Clara over his shoulder, his eyes cold, his lips curling into the faintest smile, as if to say, "This isn't over." Clara had gathered everything, her journals filled with dates and details, the recordings of his whispered threats, and the necklace that once belonged to Elena, still faintly stained with blood. Each item felt like a piece of herself she had hidden in the shadows, now brought into the light. For the first time, she believed the nightmare might truly end. But as the trial began, Clara discovered that monsters do not vanish easily. The courtroom was nothing like she imagined. It wasn't just a place of truth, it was a stage. Adrian knew how to perform. Dressed in his tailored suit, hair perfectly combed, he spoke with calm authority, telling the jury that Clara was unstable, that she had imagined everything. He smiled at them, charmed them, reminded them of his successful career and his spotless public reputation. He even laughed at moments, a soft, practiced laugh that made Clara's skin crawl. And she watched, horrified, as some of the jurors smiled back. Her testimony was grueling. She spoke of the control, the manipulation, the burn on her arm. She read passages from her journals, her voice shaking. She played recordings where Adrian's threats cut through the silence of the courtroom. Some listened with sympathy, but others shifted uncomfortably, as though doubting whether the charming man sitting only feet away could truly be capable of such cruelty. Adrian's lawyers attacked her mercilessly, questioning her memory, her sanity, her motives. "Isn't it true you were unhappy in your marriage?" one asked. "Isn't it possible you exaggerated?" Each question chipped away at her strength. At night, she lay awake in her hotel room, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she was strong enough to see this through. Rowan reminded her she wasn't alone, but in the silence of the courtroom, she felt small, her voice swallowed by Adrian's practiced performance. For a moment, she feared he would win, that the world would once again believe him and doubt her. And then, on the third week of the trial, the doors opened, and a figure stepped into the room that made Clara gasp. Elena Marlowe. She was alive. Her face bore scars, her skin pale, her body thin, but her eyes were burning with a fire Clara had never seen before. The courtroom fell silent as whispers rippled through the crowd. Adrian's smile faltered for the first time. Elena raised her head and spoke clearly. "My name is Elena Marlowe. I was Adrian Blackwell's wife before Clara, and I am here to tell you what he did to me." Clara's chest tightened with tears she could not hold back. She wasn't alone anymore. The mask Adrian had worn for so long was finally beginning to shatter, not by her hand alone, but by the voices of all the women he had tried to erase. Elena's presence in the courtroom changed everything. Her voice was rough, her scars visible, but every word she spoke landed like a hammer breaking through Adrian's carefully polished mask. She told the jury about the early promises, the gifts, the charm, and then the cruelty that followed. She described being locked out of her home in the freezing night, her accounts drained without explanation, the constant whispers that she was losing her mind. When she revealed the night Adrian attacked her and left her for dead, the room fell silent, every juror staring at her in shock. Adrian, for the first time, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The floodgates opened after that. Inspired by Elena's courage, other women came forward. A former fiancé, long hidden in shame, recounted how Adrian had forced her to sign over property before she disappeared from his life. Another woman spoke of money he had borrowed under false pretenses, never to be returned. Each voice chipped away at his defense, stripping him of the charm he had wielded like a weapon. The jury no longer saw a respectable businessman. They saw a predator who had left a trail of destruction behind him. When Clara's turn came again, her body trembled as she walked to the stand. She had already spoken once, already endured hours of cross-examination. But now, after hearing Elena and the others, her voice carried a strength she hadn't known she possessed. She looked at Adrian directly, refusing to drop her gaze. "You can control me no longer," she said, her words shaking but powerful. "You told me I was weak, that I couldn't survive without you. But today I stand here with proof that you are the liar, and you will not silence me, or any of us, again." The room was still. For a moment, Adrian simply stared at her, his jaw clenched, his charm cracking like glass under pressure. Then, without warning, the mask shattered completely. He shot to his feet, his chair crashing to the floor, and roared at her across the courtroom. "You think you're free of me? You think these fools will save you? You are mine." His voice thundered, raw and vicious, spittle flying as he tried to lunge forward before the guards restrained him. Gasps filled the room. The jury recoiled, the spectators frozen in shock. In that instant, every doubt vanished. The calm, composed businessman was gone. What stood before them, straining against handcuffs, was the monster Clara had lived with behind closed doors. The performance was over, and his true self stood revealed for all to see. Clara held her ground, her heart pounding, but for the first time she felt no fear. She had wanted the world to see the truth, and now they had. Adrian Blackwell's fire no longer burned her. It burned himself. The trial reached its end with the weight of silence pressing against the walls of the courtroom. Adrian sat at the defendant's table, his once pristine suit wrinkled, his hair disheveled, his composure broken by the outburst that still echoed in everyone's memory. He no longer looked like the charming businessman who had walked in weeks earlier. He looked like a man unmasked, his darkness visible for all to see. Clara sat with her hands clenched in her lap, waiting for the words that would decide his fate. The judge's voice was firm and deliberate as he delivered the sentence. He spoke of manipulation, of cruelty hidden behind wealth and power, of the women whose lives had been shattered by Adrian Blackwell's lies. "You are a predator," the judge declared, his gavel striking the wood like thunder. "You used love as a weapon, wealth as a shield, and deceit as your language. For the safety of others and for justice to prevail, you are sentenced to life imprisonment without parole." A collective breath filled the room. Clara closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks, not from weakness, but from release. Adrian's lawyers hung their heads. The jury watched in solemn silence. For the first time, Clara felt the chains around her begin to loosen. The man who had claimed ownership over her mind and body would never again walk free. But justice did not stop with the sentence. News of the trial spread quickly, and Adrian's empire collapsed in days. Investors withdrew, accounts were frozen, property seized. His name, once spoken with admiration in London's social circles, became synonymous with scandal and abuse. Everything he had built, every piece of power he had clung to, crumbled into dust. He had spent years controlling others, but now the world had stripped control from him. As the guards moved to take him away, Adrian erupted once more, straining against their grip. His eyes darted around the courtroom, searching for Clara, for Elena, for anyone he could still intimidate. And then, as if fate itself chose the moment, an electrical spark flared above. The old chandelier that had hung in the courtroom for decades flickered, wires sparking, before a small fire crackled to life. Gasps rippled through the crowd as flames danced briefly across its edges, casting wild shadows against the walls. Adrian threw back his head and screamed, his voice filled with rage and madness. "The fire is mine, not yours," he roared, his words echoing as the guards dragged him out of the room. The sound of his voice was not human anymore. It was desperate, furious, broken. His final performance, his last attempt to cling to control, ended in chaos and humiliation. The flames were quickly extinguished. The chandelier left blackened but intact. Yet for everyone who witnessed it, the moment carried a chilling weight. It was as if the building itself had declared judgment, branding Adrian Blackwell not only guilty, but cursed by his own darkness. Clara sat in silence, her body trembling, but for the first time she did not tremble from fear. Adrian's fire had consumed itself, and she had survived. Justice had burned him, not her. Months passed before Clara truly believed the nightmare was behind her. Adrian Blackwell was gone, locked away for life, his name stripped of power, yet the scars he left, both visible and hidden, remained. Clara knew she could not simply return to her old life. Too much had been taken, too much had changed. Instead, she chose something new. She settled in a quiet seaside town in Cornwall, far from the grand houses and suffocating halls of her past. The little cottage she rented overlooked the ocean, its windows always open to the sound of waves. For the first time in years, Clara could breathe freely. She spent her mornings walking along the shore, her feet sinking into the cool sand, her lungs filling with the salt air. The sea was constant, steady, untamed, a reminder that life could be vast and uncontrollable in ways that were not terrifying, but beautiful. But Clara carried more than her own survival. She carried the stories of women who had stood beside her, women who had been silenced by Adrian's cruelty and men like him. With Elena's encouragement, she began to build something lasting, a foundation for survivors of abuse. They named it the Dawn Trust, a place where women could find shelter, guidance, and the strength to rebuild their lives. What Adrian had used to isolate her, her voice, her fear, Clara now transformed into a tool to empower others. Each time a woman walked through the doors of their center, Clara felt a piece of her own brokenness heal. Elena became her closest ally. Scarred but unbroken, she had chosen not to vanish into the shadows of her trauma, but to stand with Clara. Together, they spoke at community halls, at schools, at women's groups. They told the truth about Adrian Blackwell, not to keep his name alive, but to ensure that his shadow served as a warning. Monsters don't always look like monsters, Clara would say. Sometimes they look like the men you trust most. Still, in quiet moments, the memories returned. Clara would wake some nights to the echo of his voice, or find herself flinching at sudden movements. Healing was not perfect, nor was it quick. But each morning, as she watched the sunrise paint the horizon in colors of fire and gold, she remembered that survival itself was victory. One evening, as the tide pulled low and the sun dipped toward the sea, Clara stood alone on the cliff above the waves. The wind tangled her hair, the salt clung to her lips, and the sky seemed endless. She whispered into the vastness, words she had held in her heart since the day the trial ended. He thought he owned me, but only the law burned him. I live free. The words drifted out across the water, claimed by the wind, no longer chained to her chest. The curse of Adrian Blackwell was gone. Yet his shadow lingered, not over her, but over the world, as a cautionary tale. A reminder that silence can be deadly, but truth can set fire to even the darkest chains. Clara turned from the sea, her steps steady, ready to walk into a life that belonged only to her.